Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Anna Siefken. I'm the Executive Director for the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We have an amazing group of experts today that are going to talk with us about workforce. So we are in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is not necessarily known as the place of all new energy creation. There's a lot of history here. And so one of the things that we want to talk about is how to move ourselves into this new area for the country. So as I mentioned, the Scott Institute is bringing you this series. I want to talk about the Scott Institute. We are sort of the hub of energy-related activity at Carnegie Mellon. And so we focus on strategic partnerships, on policy and entrepreneurship, in addition to the education of our brilliant students. So this particular series is intended to start a dialogue, to continue a dialogue now that we're in our 9th webinar that we've started over the summer and will continue through 2020. But the idea is to bring together thought leadership to really focus on solutions as we pivot in 2020. So this one, as I mentioned, is about energy, equity, and workforce, specifically around developing a clean energy workforce for our future. So I want to say a couple of thank yous today. These are our partners who are joining us. I also want to thank the team at the Scott Institute. So there's a lot of work that goes into putting on a series like this. So I want to put a special thanks to Daniela Grieman, to Amanda King, Aswarya Raja, and Virginia Delaney for helping support this series. That's in addition to these partners, Duquesne Light Company, Partner for Work, Pittsburgh Regional Alliance, and today the Portland Clean Energy Fund. So we have a couple of upcoming webinars. We have one on September 17th that's focused on supply chain, specific really to solar and solar technologies. So how can businesses continue to sustain their value and grow during this time? We are hosting our annual hackathon, our energy hackathon, on September 29th and 30th. So we have a let us know you're interested process that is online right now on our website. The address is below. And then finally, on October 1st, we start our fall distinguished lecture series. We have Ann Choate, who is the Senior Vice President for Energy, Environment, and Infrastructure at ICF International, which is in the Washington, D.C. area. Very glad to have, again, continuing thought leadership speaking with us about their areas of expertise. So if you have a topic or suggestion, you can certainly send it to me or to Daniela Grieman at Carnegie Mellon. And today, our speakers, I'm going to walk through some quick introductions so we can get right to the heart of the matter. In fact, in our quick pre-conversation, we talked about how this is obviously a much longer conversation than the 45 minutes that we have allotted this morning. So Mark Anthony Thomas was appointed president of the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance, which is part of the Allegheny Conference on Community Development in July of 2019. So he's responsible for creating, developing, and executing the 10-county Pittsburgh region's economic development strategy and advancing partnerships to drive job creation and business investment. And he joined us in Pittsburgh from New York City. Next, we have Earl Buford, who is the CEO of Partner for Work, which is the leader of the public workforce system in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. So as CEO, Mr. Buford manages public and private funds to ensure that current and future needs of businesses and job seekers are met. Sarah Oliver Carter is the Chief Diversity Officer at Duquesne Light Company, which is a next generation energy company that delivers safe and reliable electricity to more than 500,000 customers in southwestern Pennsylvania. She collaborates directly with the executive team to build out the company's diversity and inclusion strategy. And then finally, Robin Wang, who is, we are proud that he is a CMU School of Engineering alum. He currently serves on the Portland Clean Energy Fund Committee and is the principal of Vibrant Future, which is an impact capital consultancy. So the Portland Clean Energy Community Benefits Fund is expected to provide $40 to $60 million annually in funding to develop living wage jobs, sustainable agriculture, green infrastructure, and residential and commercial renewable efficient projects in the Portland area. So I want to switch over, stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone. And with that, welcome everyone to this conversation. Thank you again for your time this morning. So I want to start with a question that is, I mentioned it in the intro when we were talking about this session, but we in Pittsburgh are not necessarily known as a region for clean energy jobs. Energy jobs, yes, but clean energy jobs, not as much. So are those jobs available? And where, is there a talent pool in place and properly skilled? So for companies that want to hire, are those people available and ready? And if the answer is no, how do we help companies scale in a way that we want them to? And so with that, I'm going to have Mark answer this question. I know there are several, obviously, of us who are going to answer this question. And I do want to remind folks that if you have a question that you would like to submit today, please use the Q&A function, and we will get to those questions as we can. So Mark, can you help us sort of kick off today?
I can. So first, good morning, everyone, and thank you for asking me to be a part of this conversation. What is first exciting about Pittsburgh, and I'll include Portland in this as well, is, we are known as a hub for historic energy, but also a sustainable future. And so it gives us a brand that we can really build off of. What we don't necessarily have in place, because we haven't really cultivated the workforce or the companies in the sector yet, is a really robust renewable ecosystem. And clearly the world is heading toward creating more jobs, creating a greater market and demand for all things sustainable energy. And so this is kind of an opportunity for us to start creating the pipelines and programs, and on my side of work, helping attract businesses that have that shared interest in investing in those areas here in Pittsburgh.
Sarah, would you like to answer next?
Sure. As soon as I'm able to unmute my system. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here with this esteemed panel. And I think I'm going to come from the utility perspective, right? And I'm going to kind of jump a little bit further into that question is, are we ready? Do we have a workforce that's available? I would say we're working on it. I would say that there is an opportunity to do things a little bit better to develop that workforce. I would also suggest that it starts with something called communication, right? Mark talked earlier about, being a hub, a great place to kind of start this, but I'm not sure that everybody's tapped in to what this means, right? What are the jobs that are available, and what is the skill set that is needed for this particular workforce? So I'm going to ask Earl to kind of jump in here and talk a little bit more about that, maybe even Robin.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. So what's interesting, and so as the workforce system, I think there's a misperception, and there's 800 of us across the country, workforce boards, and we all work differently. But I think because the title workforce development's in our title, that we are running programs and recruiting a ton of people, and we do. We run the job centers or career links, but really we're response. So it's kind of fitting that Mark went first as the regional strategist, Sarah representing a large utility company, and so I come in as a partner to help develop those systems and solutions and mismatches and resources that we need. So I love the fact that Sarah says we're working on it, because that's true. So Mark came to Pittsburgh in this position a year plus. I came in 2 years ago. I'm previously from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I ran the workforce system there for many years. Before that, I actually ran a workforce association, a labor management association. So I was on the other side working with across multiple sectors, particularly construction, utility, and the industrial sector and their labor partners. So I was the person tasked with helping them develop these strategies for talent development, talent solutions, and then working with the public workforce system to make those, practition those solutions. So we are working on that, Sarah said, we're in that position. So if you think about this, so there's definitely a skills mismatch, and the communication is the key. So there's approximately 15,000 people that go through my centers and my programs that we're funding per year, whether it's because of unemployment or just job seekers. So the body count is there, but the communication is needed on how do we start to really build that from the school level, at the K through 12, the university level, onto the community-based and other practicing situations. So we're working on is so apt to say, and there's a lot of initiatives that are happening, but it's still not at the scale that to really connect this ecosystem way Mark referenced at the beginning of this conversation. So I'll give Robin a chance, but I can say a lot more on that one.
Thank you. First, I want to say I'm happy to be back on campus, albeit virtually. It's this day and age, I guess. I think the challenges that we see in Portland are similar in all the other cities, and nothing, different nuances, but similar challenges. I just want to add that in addition to the skills development, which is critical, there's also an element that often is not addressed, and that is creating an environment, a work environment that is welcoming and inclusive to minority and women employees and contractors. And all too often we hear and see on projects where the environment is not welcoming, and so you ask the 19-year-old who is contemplating a career going into that, and they're thinking, why would I want to work in this environment? So so that's another critical thing that I think needs to be addressed in addition to skills. I'm not downplaying the skills, but the creating a welcoming inclusive culture is critical in this field as well.
So you've actually sort of touched on something that we have as a second question, which is there are challenges and we've identified some gaps. So how do we start to look at the skills that are needed, and how do we grow something? Basically, how do we catalyze something that isn't yet here? So in the Pittsburgh region, we don't necessarily have all of the jobs ready. How do we find the people before we have the jobs? So what are some of those gaps, and what are the skills that you see that we need?
I'd love to
please
chime in first and then have Earl kind of follow up on this. I think that is where the partnership between the work that we do and the work that Earl leads is, to some extent, he has a harder job. For us, there's so much research on here are the industries that are growing, here's where people are investing, here's the entrepreneurial scene. And so there's precedence on what the economy will look like in 5 years, 3 years, 10 years. And so for us, it's kind of structuring our work so that our region captures that growth, and that our local companies are at the forefront of kind of the markets that they're in. When you look at the university ecosystem and the workforce development systems, they have to somewhat really make a bet that 5 years from now, they've created these programs in the right curriculum that equips the participants with the skills they need. And so as we create a more comprehensive message regarding all the sectors that we see growth in, it is now really working closely with our partners locally so that they're preparing the workforce that we can then be aggressive in marketing so that we can pursue those jobs.
Absolutely, Mark. And as a matter of fact, I still go back to Sarah's communication. So as Mark and others are communicating and forecasting what's happening, there's two phases then. There's obviously immediate phase. How do we get a workforce ready to go for jobs that are hitting the market right away? And we can come back to that. Then there's also longer term growth. That's where the education systems and our partnership with them, we're developing, the old days we called it school to work, and which had a lot more apprenticeship driven models, which I would love to have come back into this market as we talk about that. So it's really that immediate phase where I mentioned the body count earlier, where folks are walking to our career link centers saying, I want a job today. And they really don't care where that's at, because they put food on the table and pay bills. But so as a system, I'm trying to do a better job of building what I call path to pathways. And so if you think about a system where if I get someone that walked in our center a job, I'm successful. Well, they're not. That's that first job paying $12, $15 an hour, not getting them geared up for the $100,000 tech job that we really need to work for. So we have to start thinking about systematic ways, whether it's through the community college and the education system, whether it's through a variety of resources that an individual can tap into along that path, so that they start at job one, working at this company, how to prepare them for job 2, 3, and 4. That's a real career pathway. Quite frankly, and my friends in philanthropy, we have this conversation all the time. We haven't quite figured that out from a public and private resource standpoint. And that becomes easier to do when we know exactly when we're forecasting properly and know exactly what those steps are. So we all have to do a better job of that communication. But I feel really promising in this market, again, having someone like Merck come in and having a great company like Duquesne Light that's thinking about these things. So it makes my life a bit easier. My job's not as hard if that's happening. And I know Robin had a few things to add from the Portland market.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you guys are talking about is a classic kind of chicken and egg kind of scenario, right? You got to create the demand for the jobs, but you also got to create the skills for the workforce. And oftentimes, if you're only focusing on one or the other, they're not in sync, and it doesn't happen. And so what we're trying to do with the Portland Clean Energy Fund is to be both the chicken and the egg at the same time. We're going to, fund renewable energy projects that's going to mandate a high degree of diverse workforce. And it's going to be long-term funding so that employers have the confidence to hire people because they know that there's a long-term funding stream for these projects. But then on the workforce development side, we're also going to fund workforce development programs, apprenticeship programs, so that students or people that want to enter the workforce, these programs are available, accessible, and affordable. That they don't have to go into a huge amount of debt to learn this initial trade, but then go through apprenticeship and various other sorts of training. And so by coordinating both the chicken and the egg side, the supply and the demand side, over the long term, the goal is to kind of create a critical mass from an ecosystem perspective, where in a few years, you're going to have enough of this going on that the system is self kind of sustaining. But that's the approach that we're trying to do is fund both the chicken side and the egg side.
Yeah, so I'd like to jump in here and just build on some of the comments. I want to go real basic, right, with what was talked about earlier in terms of communicating, right, engaging, right, and making this whole process inclusive. I think that is critically important. So we can talk about workforce development, but we want to get people excited about the opportunity and informed about what is waiting for them. And also just letting them know that through this inclusive process, you will have the opportunity to grow into your next role. So I think Earl said it really well when he said, people are worried about putting food on the table. So that's their first focus. So let's talk about partnering. Let's talk about growing. Let's talking about managing that skill set, but also let's talk about ensuring that people are engaged, they're included, and they're excited about what some of those next steps are. I think those are real critical pieces of this whole process.
Well said.
So we have some great questions coming in. I'm going to blend a few of them together as we go, but I do want to ask this next question. Many of us are not from Pittsburgh. In fact, Sarah, I think you are the one who is from Pittsburgh. Other than that, we are not from Pittsburgh. So what are some specific strategies that you've seen work in other places? And I'd like to talk a little bit about, Mark, something that you've mentioned, which is this idea of creating a regional ecosystem that's intentional. So can you talk about how we build that? And then some of the questions that are coming in are around, how do you attract diverse candidates into that ecosystem?
So if anything, I would say the vibrant markets have some intentionality in the economies that they have, right? And so Pittsburgh is no outlier there. I think we, over the last 20 years, really pushed for building out the natural gas economy here. And I think we can kind of wave a victory flag there. But now that we see these great opportunities for us to be leaders in robotics, in clean energy, all these spaces, we have to make sure that we have the right assets in place and the right marketing that we can deliver on that. How do we do things in a more inclusive way? I mean, I actually go back to like Majora Carter's Grading in the Ghetto TED Talk, right? Like communities of color have always wanted to be part of like renewable, more environmentally focused sectors. And that hasn't been something that historically we've been on the upside of. And this is kind of that moment for us to right that wrong. I would definitely say, like, if you go into a clean energy hub in Boston or in other places, you just see a lot of diversity and a lot of interest And it's our job to really create, as Sarah alluded, that communication that these are great jobs, these are emerging sectors. Even if you're in traditional energy sectors, they also are going to be working closely with the renewable economy. And so there's a whole skill evolution that has to take place with the sector as a whole. And so I think it's an exciting time for people to actually work in the broader sector, because it's comprehensively transforming. And that in itself should be the message to attract people to it.
So I'd like to just kind of build on what Mark said and kind of share a model at Duquesne Light, again, coming from the utility perspective. So how have we seen it work, and how can we continue to attract different groups of people? You know, in the utility sector right now, there's only 23% of the workforce are women, right? So what do we do about that? So one of the things that Duquesne Light has done, which I'm really proud of, is create something called Educator in the Workforce. So I think Earl said it, I think Mark said it, I think Robin said it. We got to start early to get people excited about this, right? To help them understand, well, this is a great opportunity, life-changing job. So this Educator in the Workforce actually works with teachers in high schools to get the message out about how great these jobs are, how much opportunity there is. So there's a curriculum built, and they get credits, and they get paid for it, and they take it back to the schools and they say, hey, this is an opportunity for you. And then we try and build on that with another program. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there in terms of models and opportunities. And again, thinking about the diversity of the workforce. So that's my space. That's where I really like to think about things, right? How can we get more people engaged, excited, included, and involved to move to the next step?
I'm going to add on to Sarah's, but I'm going to use this question and talk about a different market. So previously, my work in Milwaukee, worked with a large utility company that was one of my members. We had a situation where they couldn't find enough line mechanics, all right, which is pretty common. And I'll never forget, we were sitting down for months developing a training program that, would outreach to all the right neighborhoods and right partners. And what we found out was it was their labor partner. It was a very simple, what they call it, a book signing situation. You walk into the union hall, and you sign a book based on your skills. High skills is book 5, low skills is book 1. Well, I'm gonna say it, and please take it with respect. White guys from 5 states surrounding Wisconsin knew how to come to Waukesha, Wisconsin, and sign the book. But the communication, folks from the central city of Milwaukee never even heard that. So instead of a training program, we put together a communication, kind of an outreach clearinghouse program, and dramatically transformed over 2 years the amount of recruits or amount of applicants that knew to come 20 minutes away from their home to sign this book. And then the training program made sense, because then we could recruit from the book. So I tell that as an example of sometimes it's as simple as make sure the systems and the communication are all aligned, so that those pathways and those opportunities are readily known by everyone. So it's not always about these great programs. It's sometimes having the systems within that ecosystem that make sense and that are communicating, and that all folks know what these opportunities are and how to access them.
And let me piggyback on what you're saying. I think the model that we use at the Portland Clean Energy Fund is extremely community driven. And as part of the criteria that we use to evaluate the grants that we'll be making, is a large part of it is based upon community engagement. The nonprofit that's applying for these funds, we're going to give them a higher score if they're going to be engaging the community. And through that engagement, the idea is that it's going to encourage excitement, involvement with the communities that we want to serve. We're not doing a kind of top-down kind of model of philanthropy here, where there's a benefactor, albeit well-intentioned. We're really relying on the community to define what is important for your community, and let's get your community engaged in developing these projects. And through that engagement, people get excited about pursuing careers. They know about the opportunities that exist, and go engage in the programs to get the right training and become part of the green economy.
I'm just add one last piece, and I don't know if training is always the answer. I think we, especially urban cities, we fall into the training game mode when we have a lot of individuals that have been dislocated from big industry. So some can walk into some of these opportunities, as I mentioned in the earlier example. So we need to have a direct hire strategy, a pathway strategy, and a training strategy all in one. So it's not one above the other. But I know it's a big piece in urban markets where, as a workforce board, we give a lot of training dollars out. We give a lot of training to our community partners, and that's a sustainable model for them. But I think we forget that sometimes just the communication, the matching that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of great questions coming in, and I want to make sure to get to some of these. In fact, I was about to ask a question about entrepreneurship, so it's coming in a second. But what I want to ask is a question, because someone, Jim Blakely, has asked a question that says, in Western Pennsylvania, many of those who will be displaced by the decline of the fossil fuel industry are in rural areas. So what jobs will be created in those areas, or do we assume that the majority of the renewable jobs will be in urban areas? It's a great question.
Yeah, I don't think that the jobs will be dispersed across the country. So it won't be like concentrated in just urban cities. We definitely have a lot of industry displacement. Part of what our job is to really look at, okay, if you have, say, a county that has 5,000 workers who have key skills that can be adaptable to other forms of manufacturing, other verticals within energy, or other just sectors in general, how do we make sure they're connected to those opportunities? And a lot of work that Earl does really is that direction point. Like I said, our job is to really make sure that every economy is set up to where the next decade, there isn't like a massive decline or is super dependent on one or two things, that the diversification of their local economies creates a dynamism so that it can continue to thrive no matter what happens in the world. And that hasn't been the history that Pittsburgh has frankly set itself up for. And that's what we're trying to really move us to a more sustainable approach moving forward. Our rural areas are still in good proximity to where the population on the East Coast is growing. Our people can make all types of things from what I've seen. That is the message that we need to sell to the next big manufacturer, the next big industry, versus we're only good at one or two things.
So that question that came in is about entrepreneurship. So how do we encourage and support entrepreneurship in diverse communities? For example, says Laura Humphrey, HVAC contractors are an aging workforce, and in an industry predominantly of small businesses, could there be a model to help diverse communities establish new small businesses?
Well, I know Mark probably has more to say on that than others, but I know, especially as we lived through COVID, a lot of the groups, especially the economic development groups in this area, whether it's the URA, Ridgeway Capital, CDFI, Allegheny County Economic Development Office, have really done a fine job of outreach to new entrepreneurs, new companies, support, and have given a lot of emergency grants, as a matter of fact, for the past few months, so much that we're partnering with them. So as they give out entrepreneur grants, to make sure that there's a workforce angle in those conversations, whether it's a wage subsidy or training or whatever it is, the resources that they need to support that new influx of resources. We are having those conversations, which, in some markets, or even here a few years ago, we weren't even having this conversation, but COVID has forced us to, good pressure, I always say, forced us to come together and pull our resources together to support the exact entrepreneur conversation and small minority and Black-owned businesses that are either just starting out or growing and hopefully thriving. So that's a promising turn of events over the past few months.
Yeah, I would just add, as a former business owner, entrepreneur myself, and I used to also head a CDFI here in the Portland area, I think it's really important to kind of create that ecosystem of support, both on the capital side and the technical assistance side, and really support the entrepreneur that has this idea that says, I want to do this. And maybe in the past, it's like, nah, this is not a good idea. But if you surround yourself with an ecosystem that's providing that support, that's providing some of that, hand-holding that's needed for new entrepreneurs, you'll find a lot of entrepreneurs, it's like, hey, I can really do this, right? And And with that nurturing and with that support, they can start the business, grow their business, and create wealth for themselves and the community. So I think it's really important to for regional areas to foster a very inclusive entrepreneur support network. And if you're an entrepreneur, they do exist. Some cities and regions are better than others, but they do exist, and make sure that you get tapped into those networks, because they provide some tremendous resources. And a lot of it is very affordable, if not free.
I'd love to add on to what Robin kind of alluded to. And I'll explain kind of what ecosystem is for people who aren't necessarily familiar with it. Is really to where you can walk through a door as an entrepreneur and find mentors, find funding, find support, and find really the tools you need to turn an idea into a viable business. And what is great, Pittsburgh has like this amazing R&D infrastructure. So much of our current tech brand is built around that. We're not the best though at like just pure startup numbers, and having incubators and accelerators and co-working spaces. We trail a lot of the people we want to be in the league with. And part of our work for the next few years, and there's a multi-year effort, is to really build out that support infrastructure so that if you didn't graduate from a local school, or you didn't already kind of come with some existing funding, you can find a path into the innovation economy. And the clean tech sector is a part of that.
So we have a couple of questions about partners and the role of partners in all of this. Like, what kind of partners have come together in Portland? How does a utility company sort of play into this space? So maybe that's another question that's coming together. Again, it's a blend of several questions that have come in, but how do we leverage the partnerships to create the ecosystem, Mark, that you're talking about? Like, who needs to be the start or the push? How does that kind of come together, or what have we seen in other places that we could emulate?
Great, should I go first?
Sure, it's a hard question.
Yeah, well, it's to some extent anyone can take the lead, right? Like when you really look at, if you look at the top 20 like entrepreneurial cities in America, they all have kind of different anchors, and some could be universities, others can be government, others can be like an anchor VC fund or foundation. And so I think in our region, because it is quite fragmented, and then we do have organizations like the Allegheny Conference, we've really done a lot of just kind of internal soul searching on how do we provide that thought leadership, how do we direct a lot of our research, how do we provide a better story for us to sell the region, since so much of our work is targeting kind of external capital and external opportunities. Because even if you're an entrepreneur here, the next question you're going to ask is, how do I get more funding? So that means we need to be attracting more VCs from outside of the region to fund.
What are the barriers? Like, why, like, let's do this.
Yeah, so there's kind of a lot that I think we can take on. And I think the universities, I love to see all the smaller town mayors play a greater role in innovation, which is something I think we need to build our capacity to do. But I think we're having the right conversations, and we're having the right engagement on how do we position the region well after this current crisis so that we thrive.
I want to add on to Mark's and use an example. So the former market that I worked in previously, their version of the Allegheny Conference, it's called the Greater Milwaukee Committee, is in place. There's a Chamber of Commerce that's separate. There's a regional alliance that's separate. They're all separate. And there's a layer of dysfunction because they're separate. So for me to walk into the workforce job here and to have the Allegheny Conference, the PRA, and the Chamber of Commerce all in concert was very attractive, because that's a good place to lead. It may not lead every time, it may not lead everything, but to have that coordination already at the top. Then you add in the fact that the colleges here, I've met or worked with every university president in this market. In my hometown, I probably work with 1 out of 11. So the ability of folks wanting to work together, it's not perfect yet, but the point is the systems are the opportunity for collaboration is there. The opportunity for leadership is there. There's a lot more to do. There's a lot more resources to bring in, but the fact that all the folks on this webinar now are working together in some way, somehow, is really attractive. And that's what makes me excited every day I wake up trying to figure out these talent solution opportunities. So we shouldn't sleep on the fact that our coordination is actually intact, and now the ecosystem should become easier to build.
Sarah, can you talk a little bit about the utility perspective in that space?
Yeah, I was thinking about this just a little bit, and we're talking about entrepreneurship here. So I think one of the things that is striking for me is the individual, right? So I've heard a lot of really good things in terms of collaboration and partnership, and specifically educational partnerships and all of that. But what I do know is that, there are not a lot of people who know how to get started in this space, right? They don't necessarily understand what that means to them. So, I've talked to individuals who've said, I'd love to get started. I'd love to learn more, but they don't know where to reach out. And so I think just making that much more available on certain platforms where people are would be helpful. I think too, from a utility perspective, I think we're really focused on the workforce side of things right now. We're focused on trying to get more people into the utility and consider it as an opportunity for growth. And there are things that we are doing at Duquesne Light to do that. So there are programs, there's partnerships with, different educational institutions. And I'm just going to kind of break a little bit away from the conversation and talk about one of these programs. One of them is the EDT program. And again, it is a partnership, right? Not necessarily linked to entrepreneurship, but it is an opportunity to grow workforce development in this particular space. And this particular partnership is with CCAC, right? And it offers entree into a field where people have never been before. So there's training, right? Real world training. And then when you get through this training and you get through the testing, there's opportunity to have a life-changing job. So I'm going to I kind of changed it a little bit because, again, I'm speaking from a utility perspective, and, I want to kind of pivot back to the workforce conversation a little bit more, and why, all those things that have been said earlier in terms of, partnerships and, education, they're all critical, and just kind of wrap it up, in that bow and kind of say, yeah, here's this really great program that we're talking about, and here's how we can continue to grow. One last thing, and we haven't really talked about this, so again, I'm going to pivot and change things as I usually do, right, is we talked earlier about how do we tap into some of those diverse communities just across the board. We haven't really talked too much about that. And if we could maybe, just think about who those communities are, right? So there's a community of veterans, right, that are very able-bodied, right? They have a strong background. They bring a lot to the space. So how do we tap into that? How do we tap into the world of people with disabilities? How do we continue to tap into the communities of color to get them engaged not only in the conversation that we're having today, but also in the workforce development side, right? I think that all of this is critical in terms of coordination and collaboration. So I'll leave it there.
Sarah, I just want to thank you for bringing that up, but also in addition to that, as we have the equity conversation, inclusion conversation, the REI, DEI conversation, of what our companies, what our industry is doing around that, with the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the open conversation we're having. I've now, years past when we talked in almost coded language of neighborhoods or minority. Well, now we can say Black people, brown people, certain special populations. I couldn't say that 6 months ago, or if not a year ago. And so I feel free now to have a direct conversation about what policy we're trying to pull or talk about. So let's keep having that free conversation about, on the external side and the talent development, but also internally as we get people into these new cultures and are these cultures ready for them.
So I want to, we're almost at the end of time and we knew this would happen. I do want to quickly ask for a follow-up on policy. Are there policy levers that we should be using to our advantage? Funding mechanisms, that kind of thing. So are there things that we should be doing to unlock this potential? at the workforce individual level as well as the ecosystem level, right? Because we've talked about both today. And then I definitely want to get a final thought from each of you. So let's make sure we have time for that right before we turn the poll on, because we do want to find out what people think about this conversation today. We're testing it out. So at the very end, please, I'm going to put a poll up for everyone to give us some feedback. So who'd like to go first on that policy question before we talk about final thoughts?
I can speak to the policy piece. Like, it is very critical. It is key because I mean, we have enough evidence to know entrepreneurship drives recoveries. People need the right skills to really elevate themselves into great opportunities. And so we definitely need to do an audit kind of how we spend our own resources and ensure through an equity lens that we're actually providing access for people into the industries of the future. And that is the right question that we should be asking ourselves right now. And then be in a place where we can shape policies that hit at these underlying issues.
I would say from a Portland Clean Energy Fund perspective, the thing that we've been championing is community-driven long-term funding for these type of projects. Community-driven being that the people of the community know best how to deploy that capital, what projects are best suited to benefit the community. And then the long-term piece of it is, by ensuring that there's long-term funding for these projects, people can make the investments, reduce the risk of pursuing these projects to create green jobs, train workforce, and implement climate action projects.
Earl or Sarah?
Sorry. There you go. Well, first of all, thank Mark and Robin for hitting that. It's critical, and I think right now, at least some local policy leaders seem to get it. I've worked closely with most of the local electeds, especially the mayor and the county exec, but I'm really finding some promising conversations come out of the Pittsburgh Black Elected Officials Coalition. I feel like they're focused on infrastructure, transportation, and things like childcare, and how does that affect talent development conversation has been really promising, and what policies can they do, and also looking at what municipalities can do and think about as they drive economic development and workforce development. So that's been a promising conversation over the past year for me at the local policy level.
Any other comments, Sarah? Nope. So with that, I do want to have final thoughts. I'm gonna put the poll up because I do want to get the comments up from our audience at the same time as you all are giving final thoughts. So how about we'll go Earl, Robin, Mark, and then Sarah on our final comments.
Well, first of all, as I read the Q&A, I did answer some of them directly. So if I didn't get to you, I apologize. But I think the summation of this conversation for me, and of course, hours, we could have used 3 hours easy, is the fact that still Mark's ecosystem term. Pittsburgh is in an interesting time in that folks want to develop this ecosystem. We may not have all the answers on how to do that, but the desires there, the wants there, from a supply side and from a demand side, and with the equity lens. So I came to this market because of that potential, and I'm here 2 years later because of that potential. Now I want that potential to grow and become a reality. So these conversations help with that.
Okay.
I would say it's just, this is exciting work. It's critical work. And as Earl mentioned, I think in just the past few months, we're kind of given permission, and that's not the right word, to have these conversations. And it's just a burden that's lifted. And, now you understand really what the struggles that people are facing, and you can have earnest conversations about how to address these problems. And so even though the challenges are there, and sometimes they may seem insurmountable, the fact that you can even have conversations, that's just exciting. And through those conversations, they'll lead to action. It may take some time, and it took us centuries to get to where we are now. We're not going to fix this in 6 months. So for me, I think it's just exciting. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of passion for change, and whether it's in this forum or others, I'm just looking forward to continuing these conversations.
Mark?
Okay, yeah. No, so the one thing I'll add, and just kind of building on what everyone has said, is we may have missed the on-ramp in the last decade to really create the right cluster of clean energy opportunities. Kind of what Earl alluded to, of us having kind of the right people, the right conversations, the right collaboration, the right leaders at a lot of the companies, traditional and new, that we're not going to miss anything that the future is shaping for our region. And that is in electrical vehicles, that is in all types of advanced manufacturing, across the board. We're heading in the right direction, and we will do so in an inclusive way where people really will feel and see a difference in how they think about this region in the next decade.
Yeah. So I think everyone said everything that I was probably thinking. I'd like to add that this all starts with people, right? And we want to get people prepared and excited. And for me, this has been an exciting conversation, especially with this particular group of people. So I've been learning. So again, I think part of that strategy is people, right? Getting people informed, excited, getting them out, right? Thinking about how we continue to grow this outreach with this inclusive and equity lens, right? How we think about getting people into the system, how we help them move and develop, and how they become ambassadors about this conversation that we're having today. How they start to share the message and the good news of, hey, this is a really good space. And in this space, as an individual, I can make a difference. I can make a good living. I can put food on my table, and I can grow. So again, you know, I think that this is really exciting, great opportunities, and just new ways of looking at things differently.
Well, I want to thank, are there more comments? One more comment? I want to thank all of you for being ambassadors for the city of Pittsburgh, for the region, and for this important topic this morning. I also want to thank 59 of you for answering our poll this morning. So I'll give you another minute or two to do that while we say our thanks today. I do want to put a special thank you out to Earl Buford, Robin Wang, Mark Anthony Thomas, Sarah Oliver Carter, and your organizations for allowing us to have 45 minutes of your time this morning. Such an incredible conversation, and we know how busy everyone is right now. In fact, I find us busier than ever in these new work situations. So thank you for your time and for your insights. We look forward to continuing the conversation offline. Thank you for all of the wonderful questions that have come in. And we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. So on behalf of the Scott Institute, I want to say thank you again to all of you. And thank you to everyone who participated with us today. And with that, we will close the poll. And I will say thanks to everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your week. See you again soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.